Something happened a few weeks ago that should have been the top story on every technology channel, and almost nobody covered it. Google's quantum artificial intelligence team and a startup called Oratomic, spun out of Caltech and Harvard, published back-to-back research papers showing that quantum computers capable of breaking the encryption protecting your bank, your email, your medical records, and your private messages may arrive years sooner than anyone in the scientific community had predicted. And here's the detail that made security researchers sit up at their desks reading these papers at midnight. Artificial intelligence was, in the words of one of the lead researchers, instrumental in achieving the breakthrough. Quantum computing just got faster because artificial intelligence helped it get there, and the world is not prepared for what that means. To understand why this is serious, you need to understand what encryption actually does. Every time you log into your bank, every time your browser shows a little padlock icon, every time you send a message that says end-to-end encrypted, you are relying on a mathematical problem that is so hard to reverse that the world's fastest classical supercomputer would need longer than the age of the universe to solve it by brute force. That mathematical hardness is the entire foundation of digital security as we know it. A sufficiently large quantum computer solves those same problems not in billions of years, but in minutes, because quantum computers do not process possibilities one at a time the way classical computers do, but can explore vast numbers of solutions simultaneously through a property called superposition. For years, the reassuring answer from the scientific community was that the hardware required to do this was so far beyond what we could build that we had decades to prepare, and the US government's official planning timeline reflected that, with major encryption transitions targeted around 2035. That timeline just changed. On March 30th, 2026, Google's quantum artificial intelligence team published a paper showing a 20-fold reduction in the quantum resources needed to attack ECDSA 256, the elliptic curve encryption that secures most major financial systems, most blockchain networks, including Bitcoin and Ethereum, and a significant portion of the internet's authentication infrastructure. Where previous estimates placed the hardware threshold at roughly 9 million physical qubits, Google's new algorithm brings that number under 500,000, and their modeling suggests that on a fast enough fault-tolerant machine, a private key could theoretically be reverse engineered from an exposed public key in approximately 9 minutes. The same day, Oratomic published a parallel paper showing that Shor's algorithm, which is the quantum method for breaking RSA encryption, could run at cryptographically relevant scales, using as few as 10,000 reconfigurable neutral atom qubits rather than the millions that had been assumed in every prior estimate. That is not a modest improvement on existing projections, but a category-level shift in what the required hardware actually looks like and how soon it could plausibly exist. And here's the detail that connects artificial intelligence directly to this acceleration. Dolev Bluvstein, one of the lead researchers on the Oratomic paper, told Time magazine that there is no question that his team used artificial intelligence to accelerate their development, and that artificial intelligence is now speeding up quantum research in ways that compress timelines, in ways that are difficult to predict from the outside. The co-founder of Oratomic, Jiaqi Leng, had previously told a colleague at Google's Quantum Initiative that he had been using artificial intelligence in his research and was, in his words, seeing lots of crazy results. This is the feedback loop that matters. Artificial intelligence is accelerating quantum computing research, and quantum computing will in turn accelerate artificial intelligence by providing fundamentally more powerful computational substrates, and that loop is already running. The institutional response to these papers was immediate and telling. Within days of publication, Cloudflare, which protects roughly 20% of all websites on the internet, announced it was accelerating its post-quantum security roadmap and targeting 2029 for full post-quantum protection across its entire platform. Bas Westerbaan, a cybersecurity researcher at Cloudflare, told Time directly that the papers were a real shock, and the company's announcement explicitly cited both the Google and Oratomic papers as the catalyst for moving the deadline forward. Google had already made an identical move, setting its own internal post-quantum migration deadline at 2029 on March the 25th, just 5 days before the papers dropped, suggesting the company had advanced knowledge of its own research team's results and was already acting on them. IBM Quantum Safe's chief technology officer has stated publicly that quantum moonshot attacks could arrive as early as 2029. There is also a threat that does not wait for quantum computers to arrive, and it is already in operation. It is called Harvest now, decrypt later, and the concept is straightforward. Sophisticated adversaries and state actors are actively collecting encrypted data today, storing it, and waiting for quantum computers powerful enough to decrypt it retroactively. Your medical records, corporate intellectual property, classified government communications, and private messages sent over the next few years may be sitting in someone else's storage today, and the moment a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists, that stored data becomes readable, going all the way back to when it was collected. NIST, the U.S. government's technology standards body, finalized its first 3 post-quantum encryption standards in August 2024, and its transition guidance calls for quantum vulnerable algorithms to be deprecated after 2030 and broadly disallowed after 2035, with the most widely used schemes, including RSA 2048 and EC DSA explicitly in scope. NSA's CNSA 2.0 framework mandates that all new national security systems be quantum safe by January 2027. The European Union's Cyber Resilience Act is moving toward a quantum safe by design framework with high-risk use cases expected to complete migration by 2030. What all of this means practically is that the transition from current encryption to post-quantum cryptography is now a matter of years, not decades, and organizations that have not started that transition are already behind the curve. For individuals, the practical steps are clear. Using a password manager with long, unique passwords for every account matters more now than it did before, because if quantum computers can eventually break the encryption protecting stored credential databases, recycled passwords become a disaster the moment any single database is compromised. Enabling two-factor authentication on every account that matters, your bank, your email, anything with financial or personal data attached, adds a layer that quantum computers cannot break because they crack mathematical encryption but cannot intercept a physical device in your pocket generating a one-time code. For organizations, the action is a cryptographic inventory, identifying every system that relies on RSA, ECDSA, elliptic curve, Diffie-Hellman, or similar algorithms, prioritizing the longest-lived secrets and signatures, and beginning migration to NIST's finalized post-quantum standards, now rather than when the deadline becomes unavoidable. The broader picture here is not only a threat story, the same convergence of artificial intelligence and quantum computing that is accelerating the timeline on encryption vulnerability is also accelerating drug discovery, climate modeling, materials science, and every scientific domain, where the number of variables exceeds what classical computers can handle. The papers that caused Cloudflare to move its deadline and prompted Google to set its own 2029 target are also the papers that are pulling those scientific applications years closer than anyone expected. The question for anyone paying attention right now is whether they are positioning themselves to understand and navigate that shift before it becomes unavoidable. Because the window between when something is clearly coming and when it has already arrived is exactly where first mover advantage is built. If this changed how you are thinking about where quantum and artificial intelligence are headed and what to actually do about it, subscribe and leave a comment below about which part of this concerns you most, whether that is the encryption threat, the harvest now decrypt later reality, or the artificial intelligence acceleration angle, because I want to know what you are focused on.